My family invested everything into a small cafe, and it was our pride. When that chain opened nearby, they began suffocating us with contracts and dirty competition. I gathered the evidence and showed people how it had been happening, and the outcome exceeded my expectations. They didn't just steal our cafe, they tried to crush our family dream. But they didn't see me coming. My family's cafe wasn't just a business, it was the heartbeat of everything we had built. Every chipped cup, every hand-painted sign, every fragrant morning brew carried our sweat, our laughter, and our pride. We poured our lives into it, believing that dedication could shield us from the cruelty of the world. But then the chain moved in, massive, sterile, gleaming, and suffocatingly aggressive. They didn't just open nearby, they strangled us with contracts, undercut prices, and smothered our suppliers until our little cafe began to wilt under the weight of their shadow. It was more than competition, it was war. And we were losing. I remember standing in the emptying cafe one evening, the smell of burnt coffee lingering like a ghost of what was once ours. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling hotter than any espresso shot we'd ever pulled. I refused to believe that hard work, honesty, and love could be wiped away by cold, corporate greed. Something inside me snapped. If they thought they could erase us, they were wrong. Very wrong. I began quietly. First, I documented everything. Unfair contracts, hidden fees, slashed deals, supplier manipulations, every tactic they had used to strangle us. I dug through emails, receipts, photos, and even recorded conversations that revealed their strategy to suffocate local cafes. It was meticulous work, almost obsessive. Every late night spent scanning documents, comparing invoices, and piecing together their systematic oppression felt like laying the foundation of a quiet, inevitable storm. I reached out to the other cafes they had bullied. Most had given in, but a few brave owners whispered stories of similar abuses. I recorded them, gathered their evidence, and built a dossier that revealed a chain of greed masked by a shiny logo. I wasn't acting out of revenge alone. I was acting for justice, for every small business they had tried to swallow. I even created an anonymous blog, detailing the chain's strategies and exposing the truth to the public. Meanwhile, I didn't act openly. I smiled, brewed coffee, greeted customers, and pretended everything was normal while my plans silently grew. Every time the chain's representatives strutted in, arrogantly checking our little cafe, I hid a smirk behind the counter. I knew the storm was coming, and they were about to feel the full weight of exposure. The moment of reckoning came subtly but sharply. One morning, the blog posts went live with detailed evidence. Contracts, supplier testimonies, hidden clauses, and recorded conversations. Social media exploded. Local journalists picked up the story. Customers, enraged at the chain's manipulations, flooded our cafe, finally giving us the attention and support we deserved. Orders quadrupled, donations and messages of solidarity poured in, and the chain's glossy storefront nearby started to empty. Their managers called our suppliers in panic, investors demanded explanations, and suddenly, the giants we had feared were faltering under the weight of the truth. I watched it unfold from behind the counter, pouring a cappuccino as the news spread. Satisfaction surged like the strongest espresso shot. The same people who had tried to destroy us were now crumbling publicly, exposed to the scrutiny they had never expected. They had underestimated a small family with nothing but grit, loyalty, and evidence. Our cafe survived. The chain backed off, forced to renegotiate and retreat. We were bruised, but alive, and stronger than ever. Standing in the quiet aftermath, sipping our own coffee, I realized something. Justice is sweetest when served slowly, deliberately, and publicly. And you? If someone tried to crush your dreams, would you fight back like this? Or let it go? After the first victory, I should have felt relief, a sense that the battle was over, but instead, the fire inside me only grew hotter. The chain hadn't just attacked our cafe, they had attacked our pride, our family, and our sense of justice. I realized that winning this skirmish was only the beginning. The more I learned about how they operated, the more I understood the depth of their corruption, the way they systematically crushed anyone who dared to stand in their way. It wasn't personal. They treated everyone like disposable pawns, but for me, it had become intensely personal. I couldn't just sit back and celebrate. I had to ensure that no one else would fall victim to the same ruthless tactics. I began observing them in ways I had never imagined. I learned their patterns, the way their managers scheduled supplier visits, the timing of their promotional campaigns, even the language they used in internal emails that betrayed their arrogance and contempt. I watched them like a hawk, waiting for any slip, any weakness, any opportunity to turn their own schemes against them. My friends and family thought I was obsessing, but I didn't care. Obsession felt like control, and control was something the chain had stolen from us. Slowly, meticulously, I built a network of allies. Local business owners who had been bullied into submission, former employees who had grown disillusioned, and even a few disenchanted suppliers who were tired of being manipulated. Each one brought pieces of the puzzle, snippets of information, small confirmations that what I suspected was true. They had overextended themselves, assuming that sheer size and intimidation could suppress anyone small enough to fall. But they had underestimated the power of truth, the power of patience, and the power of people who refused to be crushed. I continued documenting every interaction, every shady deal, every hidden clause in contracts that had been forced upon others. I collected screenshots, recorded conversations, even captured evidence of practices that could be considered illegal. It felt like constructing a fortress, each piece of evidence a brick that would one day collapse their empire. At the same time, I cultivated our café, keeping it open, welcoming every customer with a smile and a warmth that only a family-run business could provide. It was essential that our public image remained untarnished. If anyone suspected our fight, the chain could retaliate in ways we weren't ready for. Every latte I poured, every pastry I baked, every greeting to our regulars was an act of theater, a mask that concealed the storm building behind the scenes. One day, I stumbled upon a goldmine of information entirely by accident. A supplier, disgruntled after months of mistreatment, accidentally left a contract draft open on his tablet while visiting the cafe. It was a labyrinth of hidden clauses, secret penalties, and manipulative pricing strategies that revealed exactly how the chain had been crushing small businesses for years. My heart raced as I realized the scope of what I had just discovered. This was more than just a weapon. It was the key to exposing their entire operation. I copied every file, encrypted the data, and began piecing together a report so detailed that no one could dismiss it as hearsay. My nights became consumed by analysis, cross-referencing supplier testimonies, tracking financial irregularities, and mapping connections that the chain thought were invisible. Meanwhile, the chain continued its efforts to suppress us, unaware that every move they made was being monitored, documented, and prepared for exposure. They launched another promotional campaign, flooding the neighborhood with flyers and special discounts, trying to lure our customers away. I watched it with a mixture of amusement and contempt. Their arrogance was palpable. They thought sheer volume and intimidation could erase years of loyalty and community. But every flyer they distributed, every ad they posted, became evidence. Every aggressive interaction with our suppliers was captured, every attempt at sabotage meticulously noted. The more they tried, the more ammunition I gathered. I also took steps to subtly influence public perception. I started writing anonymous reviews and posts that highlighted not just our café's unique charm but also the chain's manipulative practices, without directly naming them. Word spread. Locals began questioning why a chain would need to undercut independent cafés so aggressively. Conversations started to circulate, curiosity turned to investigation, and suddenly, the chain's public image was beginning to fracture, not through confrontation, but through a careful, calculated whisper campaign. Then came the day I decided to push further. I arranged a community meeting at our café, inviting all the small business owners, suppliers, and former employees who had been affected. It was framed as a casual gathering, a space to discuss challenges and share experiences, but in reality, it was the beginning of the next phase of my plan. People spoke freely, sharing stories of manipulation, intimidation, and underhanded tactics. I recorded everything, compiled statements, and started weaving a narrative that would make the chain's practices undeniable. The energy in the room was electric. Anger, frustration, and determination mixed into a collective force that I could harness. I felt like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of justice that was about to crescendo. I knew the climax was approaching, but I didn't act hastily. Patience was my ally. Each day, I added more evidence, more testimonies, and more public engagement. I leaked small hints of the chain's corruption online, watching as rumors and speculation began to unsettle their managers and investors. Their confidence faltered, their communications became defensive, and the cracks I had predicted started to appear. It was exhilarating, watching the mighty stumble without them even realizing why. Every interaction, every calculated step, brought me closer to the moment when the storm would finally hit, and when the truth would explode in the open. And yet, amidst all the plotting, I remained grounded in the reason for my revenge. This wasn't just about satisfaction or anger, it was about justice. About making sure that the chain, and anyone who thought they could bulldoze over small dreams with impunity, understood that power has limits, and that even the smallest voices, when united, can roar louder than any corporation. I often paused, looking around our cafe, inhaling the familiar smell of coffee and pastries, and reminded myself why I was doing this. For my family, for our dream, and for every small business that deserved a fair chance. As I closed the cafe each night, reviewing my evidence one last time before locking up, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The pieces were in place. The storm was gathering. And soon, very soon, the world would see what had been hidden for too long. And the question lingered, both in my mind and in the shadows of the coming days. When the moment finally came, would justice taste as sweet as I imagined, or would the weight of retaliation prove heavier than I could carry? One thing was certain. I was ready, and nothing could stop the wave I was about to unleash. And now I ask you, watching this unfold, if someone tried to destroy everything you loved, would you patiently build your case and strike back, or would you walk away and let them win? The days that followed felt like living inside a slow, simmering storm. Every morning, I walked into the cafe, greeting our loyal customers with the same warmth as always. But beneath the surface, I was a predator circling my prey. The chain still underestimated me, still flaunted their dominance, still believed that size and intimidation could silence the little family that dared to defy them. They had no idea that every move they made, every boastful comment, every coercive negotiation, was being meticulously logged, catalogued, and transformed into the ammunition that would eventually dismantle them. It was a strange feeling, living this double life. To the world, I was the cheerful barista, the humble owner pouring coffee with a smile. In reality, I was a strategist, a silent architect of their downfall, and the anger and satisfaction I felt bubbled quietly beneath the surface, like molten lava waiting to erupt. The network I had built grew stronger by the day. Small business owners who had been too scared to speak now shared their stories freely, contributing their experiences to the dossier I was compiling. Suppliers who had been coerced into exclusive contracts began providing internal documents, revealing hidden clauses, kickbacks, and manipulative practices. Former employees, embittered by years of exploitation, handed over internal memos and emails that painted the chain in starkly unflattering colors. I processed it all, sleeplessly dissecting every line, every transaction, every connection. I could see the full pattern now, a web of greed and intimidation, meticulously designed to crush anyone small enough to challenge them. And yet, for all their cunning, they had left traces, cracks, and vulnerabilities that were invisible to the casual observer but glaringly obvious to someone who had been watching as closely as I had. One evening, as the cafe was quiet and the last customers trickled out, I spread all my files across the counter. Screenshots, contracts, recorded conversations, photos, supplier letters, they covered every surface. I had organized them into categories: financial manipulation, aggressive contract practices, supplier coercion, public relations deception. It was a blueprint of corruption, and holding it in my hands was intoxicating. I could almost taste the satisfaction of what was to come. But I reminded myself to be patient. This wasn't a matter of snapping my fingers and watching them crumble. It required precision, timing, and the perfect crescendo. One wrong move, and they could bury us under lawsuits, smear campaigns, or even more aggressive business tactics. Patience was the ultimate weapon. I also continued subtly influencing the public narrative. I wrote posts and reviews under anonymous accounts, highlighting not just our cafe's charm but the broader injustice that the chain perpetuated. It was careful work, walking a tightrope between revealing enough to stir suspicion and anger, but not enough to provoke premature retaliation. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Customers who had once flocked blindly to the chain started questioning its ethics. Local newspapers and bloggers began picking up stories, fueled by whispers and tips from those who had suffered under the chain's tactics. I watched as their polished image began to crack, their confidence waver, and I knew I was approaching the critical moment when all the pieces would align. The most delicate part of my plan involved the suppliers. They were the chain's lifeline, the invisible hands that ensured the giant ran smoothly while crushing smaller businesses. I contacted several who had been mistreated or manipulated, presenting them with a choice: continue to silently serve the chain and risk future exploitation, or join forces and expose the system. Most hesitated, fearing retaliation, but the promise of justice, and the small victories I had already orchestrated, persuaded them. Slowly, meticulously, I gained their cooperation, and with their help, I acquired documents and recordings that would have been impossible to obtain alone. Every interaction was a risk, every meeting, a high-stakes negotiation. But the sense of empowerment, of reclaiming something that had been stolen from so many, was addictive. Then, one particularly tense morning, the chain made a mistake. Their regional manager, arrogant and careless, attempted to strong-arm a supplier in a way that was blatant and reckless. I had anticipated such behavior, and I was ready. With a discreet recording device, I captured the confrontation, a perfect example of their bullying tactics. It was the kind of evidence that, once revealed, would shock the public and leave no room for denial. That single recording became the linchpin of the next phase of my plan, a public exposure so precise, so undeniable, that it would ripple through every corner of the local business community. I smiled as I replayed it in private, feeling a rush of anticipation. The storm was almost here. In parallel, I coordinated with the anonymous blog I had started months earlier. I scheduled posts to release the information in a sequence designed to maximize impact. First, testimonials from other small business owners. Next, supplier documents and recordings. And finally, the regional manager's confrontation, which would serve as the explosive climax. Each post was carefully worded, balancing outrage and credibility, ensuring that it would ignite conversation and attract media attention. The chain would not see it coming. They were too busy managing their appearances, blinded by arrogance. Meanwhile, our café thrived quietly, its popularity surging as locals, now aware of the injustice, flocked to support us. It was poetic. Their attempts to crush us had inadvertently strengthened us, fueled by public sympathy and outrage. I also prepared for the inevitable backlash. Legal teams were consulted, contingency plans devised, and every piece of evidence backed up in multiple locations. I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. The chain had money, lawyers, and influence, but I had truth, strategy, and the support of a community that was tired of being manipulated. I had turned the very tools they used to dominate the market, their own contracts, communications, and internal chaos, against them. Every late night, every conversation, every document gathered had led to this moment of impending reckoning. As I walked home that night, the city lights reflecting off the rain-soaked streets, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. The plan was ready, the pieces were in place, and soon the world would witness the collapse of a corporate giant that had underestimated the power of the small, the brave, and the determined. I imagined the moment of revelation, their faces when the evidence went public, the scramble to contain the damage, the shock of investors and customers alike. Justice, I realized, is not instantaneous. It is a carefully constructed sequence, a patient accumulation of truth, and when it arrives, it hits harder than anything else. And I wondered, as I paused under the street lamp, dripping rain and anticipation, if the tables were turned, if you held the keys to exposing injustice and reclaiming what was stolen, would you have the patience to wait for the perfect moment, or would you act too soon and risk losing everything? Could you endure the tension, the silent plotting, the long nights of preparation, for a victory that would be worth every sleepless hour? The morning the first post went live, I arrived at the café with a strange mix of nerves and exhilaration. I moved through the familiar space, brewing coffee, arranging pastries, greeting the regulars, all the while feeling the weight of the impending storm pressing down on me. On my laptop, I opened the blog dashboard, watching as the first waves of traffic hit the site. Comments began to flood in almost immediately, some in shock, some in anger, others sharing their own stories of being wronged. The chain had no idea what was coming. Their reputation, meticulously constructed over years, was about to unravel in a public spectacle they would be powerless to stop. I poured a cappuccino with steady hands, hiding the adrenaline that made my heart race, and watched the world begin to turn against them. Within hours, local journalists picked up the story, amplifying the posts, quoting the documents, and highlighting the testimonials from small business owners. Social media erupted. People shared the posts, tagged friends, and debated the ethics of the chain's business practices. Investors began to call internal meetings, managers scrambled to respond, and the first cracks in their polished facade appeared. Emails leaked to me through my network of insiders confirmed what I had anticipated: panic. The very systems they had relied on to intimidate and dominate were now turning against them. I felt a quiet, smug satisfaction knowing that every careful step I had taken, the months of documentation, the painstaking collection of evidence, the cultivation of allies, was finally bearing fruit. As the hours passed, I escalated the campaign. The next posts included screenshots of contracts, audio recordings of supplier meetings, and internal communications that demonstrated the chain's manipulative and coercive tactics. Each revelation hit like a hammer, creating waves of outrage and disbelief. Customers who had once flocked to their stores began abandoning them in droves, while our café, seemingly untouched by scandal, became a symbol of integrity and resilience. I began to notice subtle changes in the chain's behavior. Desperate social media posts defending their ethics, attempts to downplay the revelations, and hasty meetings that left their employees visibly shaken. It was exhilarating to watch them scramble, powerless to prevent the tide that was crashing down. The decisive blow, however, was still to come. I had been saving the most damning piece of evidence for the perfect moment: the recording of the regional manager bullying a supplier in a public, aggressive, and reckless display of intimidation. I knew this was the kind of evidence that would leave no room for denials, no way for the chain to spin the narrative. I carefully scheduled a release, coordinating with the blog and local media contacts to ensure maximum impact. When it finally went live, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. Shares, comments, and news coverage exploded. People were outraged, the community was enraged, and the chain's credibility imploded overnight. I watched the numbers climb with a mixture of awe and satisfaction, feeling the culmination of months of meticulous planning take shape before my eyes. Meanwhile, I maintained the appearance of normalcy in the café. Customers noticed nothing unusual except the increasing crowds and energy. Regulars complimented the coffee and pastries, oblivious to the strategic operation unfolding behind the counter. I moved among them like a conductor of a grand, invisible orchestra, each smile and gesture masking the intensity of my triumph. The storm I had prepared for so long was now a tempest, and I was at the center, orchestrating its fury with precision. As the chain's panic grew, their mistakes multiplied. Internal communications leaked to the press, confirming the worst suspicions about their manipulative tactics. Investors demanded accountability, managers were forced to resign, and suppliers, emboldened by the exposure, began renegotiating contracts on more equitable terms. The giant that had once seemed untouchable was now stumbling, cornered by the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. Every move they made to salvage their reputation only served to deepen the public's distrust. I had anticipated much of this chaos, but even I was impressed by the sheer speed and completeness of the collapse once the key evidence was revealed. It was not just the collapse of a business empire. It was the vindication of months of meticulous strategy, patience, and resilience. I could finally see the extent of the damage I had wrought: their flagship stores emptying, social media campaigns crumbling, managers apologizing publicly, and the community rallying around our café. The satisfaction was almost overwhelming, a potent mixture of relief, triumph, and righteous anger finally fulfilled. I sat behind the counter, watching the news cycle spin with stories about the chain, feeling a calm sense of power that came from knowing the truth had won. Yet amidst the satisfaction, I reflected on what this victory truly meant. It wasn't simply revenge, it was justice, public and undeniable. The chain had attempted to crush small dreams under the weight of corporate greed, and they had been brought low not by physical force, but by truth, patience, and careful orchestration. Every small business they had sought to destroy, every supplier they had exploited, had found in me an unexpected champion. I realized that my campaign had transcended personal revenge. It had become a lesson, a warning to those who might underestimate the strength of community, integrity, and strategic patience. Even as the news settled and the immediate chaos subsided, I knew the aftermath would continue to ripple through the local business world. The chain would rebuild, but differently, cautiously, and perhaps forever altered by the knowledge that even giants can be toppled when they ignore the people they exploit. I watched the last customers leave the cafe, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly, a storm unleashed with precision, and justice finally served. I knew that this victory would not erase the months of struggle, the anxiety, or the personal toll, but it had redeemed everything we had worked for and restored our dignity. And now, standing in the quiet aftermath of the storm I had unleashed, I turn to you, watching this story unfold. If you had the power to expose the injustice that had harmed you, would you wait patiently, strategically, and ruthlessly, or would you act too soon and risk losing everything? Could you endure the tension, the long nights of planning, and the careful orchestration for the sweet, inevitable taste of true justice? The days after the chain's collapse were surreal. Every time I walked through the cafe, I was met with smiles, compliments, and a renewed sense of pride from our community. The once threatened dream of my family was not only alive, it was flourishing. Yet, as I stood behind the counter pouring coffee, I realized that the real battle had never been about profit or competition. It had been about respect, justice, and proving that the smallest voices could shatter the illusion of invincibility. The chain's managers had been humbled, investors shaken, and the media had documented the entire unraveling. Their empire, once gleaming and untouchable, now bore the scars of its own hubris. I had orchestrated a downfall that was meticulous, public, and irreversible. Every late night of research, every careful conversation with suppliers and small business owners, every post on that anonymous blog had led to this moment. I felt a calm satisfaction unlike anything I had ever known. But the climax of my revenge had yet to reach its fullest expression. I had saved the most dramatic revelation for last: the public unveiling of the chain's internal strategies and the names of those responsible for the most egregious manipulations. I had obtained a full dossier of emails, memos, and internal communications, exposing not just unethical behavior but deliberate attempts to monopolize and crush every small cafe in the area. I arranged a press conference at our cafe, inviting journalists, community leaders, and every small business owner who had been affected. It was framed as a celebration of local business, but in reality, it was a stage for the ultimate reckoning. As cameras clicked and microphones were adjusted, I felt the weight of anticipation like electricity in the air. The chain had no idea what awaited them. They were too busy spinning their reputation and hoping the scandal would die down. They had no plan for the storm I was about to unleash. When the conference began, I spoke not just as a cafe owner, but as a representative of every small business that had been silenced and bullied. I told the story of how my family's cafe had been nearly destroyed, detailing every step of the chain's manipulations and abuses. I revealed the documents, emails, and recordings I had collected over months of painstaking investigation. The audience was stunned, some murmuring in disbelief, others nodding in grim recognition. I then played the recording of the regional manager coercing a supplier, a piece of evidence so shocking in its audacity that the room fell silent. Cameras captured the moment, and soon the video spread across social media and news outlets, igniting outrage and debate. The chain's carefully constructed image shattered in an instant, leaving their employees scrambling, their executives defensive, and their investors panicked. I watched, quietly satisfied, as the empire that had loomed over our small dreams crumbled before the eyes of the public. The real beauty of the revenge was not in aggression, but in timing. Every post, every leak, every revelation had been calculated to maximize exposure and impact. The chain's attempts to counteract the narrative only amplified it, as their denials and defensive statements were swiftly countered by the evidence I had gathered. Suppliers, emboldened by the exposure, began renegotiating contracts and speaking openly about the abuses they had suffered. Local businesses, once too intimidated to stand against the chain, joined the chorus of voices condemning its practices. The movement I had quietly built months earlier had erupted into a full-scale wave of justice, unstoppable and undeniable. It was exhilarating to witness, knowing that every small victory had led to this monumental climax. Amidst the chaos of the chain's downfall, I also ensured that our cafe remained a beacon of community and integrity. While the world outside debated and dissected the scandal, Inside our walls, life continued. Customers laughed, shared stories, and celebrated the resilience of local business. I moved among them, blending the ordinary with the extraordinary, pouring coffee for friends and strangers alike, all while the echoes of justice reverberated across the city. It was a delicate balance, maintaining normalcy amidst such upheaval, but it only made the victory feel sweeter. The contrast between the calm warmth of our cafe and the public implosion of the chain amplified the satisfaction of every painstaking step I had taken. By the end of the week, the chain had been forced to close multiple stores, restructure their leadership, and issue public apologies. News outlets covered the story extensively, highlighting the bravery of the community and the meticulous effort that had exposed the corporate greed. Our cafe's popularity surged, not just from curiosity, but from genuine admiration for how we had persevered and fought back. People came not only for coffee but to witness the living proof of what courage, patience, and strategy could achieve. I watched the crowds, feeling the weight of months of preparation lift, replaced by the quiet pride of a victory fully realized. Even with the triumph complete, I knew the consequences of such a public reckoning would ripple for months, perhaps years. The chain would rebuild cautiously, forever changed by the exposure. Suppliers would remember the lesson, and small businesses would gain a renewed confidence in standing their ground. My revenge had been absolute, not through violence or deceit, but through careful orchestration, patience, and undeniable evidence. And as I stood behind the counter, watching the community thrive around our cafe, I realized that revenge, when executed with precision and justice, can be more satisfying than anything else in life. Yet, amidst all the satisfaction, a question lingered, unspoken but powerful. If you held the power to right a wrong, to expose injustice, to reclaim what was stolen, could you orchestrate it with patience, strategy, and precision, or would you be tempted to act impulsively and risk losing everything? Could you endure the long nights, the careful plotting, and the tension of waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Justice is sweetest when it is earned, when it is calculated, when it arrives like a storm that no one can ignore. And now, I leave that question with you, as you reflect on this story. If someone tried to destroy your dreams, would you have the patience, cunning, and courage to bring down a giant, or would you let them walk away unchallenged?